It's been a few weeks since I filmed the intro to this video, and truthfully I haven't had all that much time to work on the Forester. All I've really done is move it around a bit, basically getting it ready for today. A lot of my wrench time has been devoted on the Cressida here. That's because the first drift day of the season is in less than a month, and I still have a lot to do. As you can see, the engine is missing a bunch of stuff that has to be powder coated and basically cleaned up, put back in, and made to run. So I won't go too in depth on that car. Unless you guys have some questions, you can always put them in the comments. If there's any Toyota fans, I'd love to hear from you. If anyone else has a Cressida, awesome. But we're gonna get focused and started on the thing you came here to see, which is the Forester build. So in order to build this thing up, we're really gonna have to break it down a bit, which means starting to take some components off. And I think today we're gonna focus on some of the stuff under the hood. So the first thing to come off is going to be the top mount intercooler. Now, I have a GrimmSpeed unit on here, the coated version, and a lot of people know it's really great. A lot of people are running high horsepower through it, but we're also developing a front mount intercooler. And so probably by the time this video is out, we'll already have the 15 plus version for sale, and then we'll also make an 08 to 14 version. But in addition to that, we're gonna have the core and end tanks for sale individually as sort of a universal kit. And that's exactly what I'm gonna throw on here. So I'm gonna pull the top mount, and I've actually got someone special that it's going out to that you guys can catch on YouTube too, and I'll get into that once we start taking it off. But really, once that's off, I'll take the bumper and front fascia off and get it ready for the front mount. Now, while we're at it, we're also going to be ditching the Cobb intake here in favor of the GrimmSpeed unit, and I'll kind of go more in depth about what that unit is all about and where the benefits are of switching to something like that. And aside from that, we're going to be taking off aesthetic things right now and really the easy things, making a plan overall of what we're going to do to the engine, because as I mentioned, it is not going to end up looking like that. It's going to be a hell of a lot prettier. So why don't we get started with pulling the intercooler and just see where that takes us. Now, top mount is generally pretty easy to take out. It's just a couple of bolts for the bypass valve here, and then some clamps for the Y pipe and the throttle body couplers. And then usually you have a bolt here, and you'll typically have a bracket with a bolt there, although I don't because of my external wastegate. After all that stuff is out, then the intercooler is loosened. However, on a Forester chassis, because it sits very close to the firewall, there's not a whole lot of room to pull it out, and especially if you've done subframe spacer deletes like I did, which forced the engine about 1.5 inches higher than normal, it's really wedged in there. So I have to go ahead and take off my strut bar, get that out of the way, and then I should be able to finagle it out. After that's done, I won't have to put it back since I'll be going to a front mount, and I'm also going to be pulling probably the AC since I don't really use it, and there's a lot of ugly components associated with it, so that area is going to be cleaned up a lot and no more try to wedge components in there. There's the white line strut bar in 3 pieces, and actually wasn't that bad to take apart once I loosened everything into those individual pieces. And actually, shout out to White Line. They always make really great stuff. I have a lot of White Line things on this car, and I've never been disappointed by it, so great job, guys. Next, we're moving on to actually pulling the top mount out. Now that we have that clearance, I can show you exactly what all the Forester guys kind of gripe about, and that's this AC line. It's pretty close to the intercooler, especially like I mentioned when you take those subframe spacers out. So I think now we got enough wiggle room. Let's see if we can get it out without scratching up any of the thermal dispersant coating on it. Okay, that wasn't so bad. What is bad is the dust on it here. It kind of looks like an archaeological dig, so we're gonna clean it up a little bit for the next owner. This one is built for an EJ series motor. On the back, you can see there's a Y-pipe with a coupler that would attach to the cold side of your turbocharger. Now, as the turbo spools up, it's going to be sending pressurized air going through here, up the split, and to the top end tank. At that point, the charge air is pretty hot, and the name of the game of the intercooler is to cool it down as much as possible before it gets to the throttle body, the intake manifold, and the engine. And so, as the air is moving internally through these bars, you also have air going down your hood scoop and through the fins out the back of the intercooler. And effectively what that's doing is cooling all of that charge air flowing internally. Now, your stock unit does the exact same thing in terms of functionality. It just does it to a much lesser degree, which is fine for stock horsepower and temperature and boost pressure. But once you start upping those through bolt-on mods, through tuning, then it becomes inefficient really quickly. And that's when you would step up to a nice, well-built aftermarket intercooler like this. So in terms of size, it's larger, but it's also important to know what's inside. The internal construction of the intercooler is very important in terms of efficiency. And again, that's why going with a well-built, reputable intercooler is a good idea. It's not all about size, but a combination of design and size. And so this is a great unit for most people out on the road. Anyone pushing 2, 3, 4, even 500 plus horsepower will benefit from using one of these, especially one with thermal ceramic coating like this, which further amplifies the efficiency of it. But at some point, you want to think about a front mount intercooler depending on your setup. Now, in my case, this car is going to be seeing the track, it's going to be seeing some hot days, and hopefully we'll be pushing over 500 horsepower pretty easily here. So at that point, I can justify going with a front mount intercooler. But for a great majority of you guys out there, look at top mounts, look at nice, well-designed units like the GrimmSpeed one, and make your decision from there. Now, this is probably not the last you're going to be seeing of this particular intercooler. I'm going to be sending it over to Cody Greenstone, who is a buddy of mine that I know through Crispy. Now, he has a YouTube channel of his own called Cars and Cody. I'm going to put a link in our description so you can check it out. But he's building an 04 FXT just like I am. He's just in the earlier stages of the build, so he's going to be doing a lot of bolt-ons like the GrimmSpeed top mount intercooler. So also, he's going to be posting step-by-step installation videos, unlike mine, where I'm not going to be going too in-depth on actually how to put it in your car. So if you're going to be doing it in the future, check out his videos. They're super helpful and a lot of fun to watch. Cody, this intercooler's been doing really well for me over the last couple of years. Hopefully you do it justice. I know you will, judging from your build that I've seen so far. So enjoy it and can't wait to see what you do with it. Back to the engine bay, I'm going to go ahead and continue with taking the old intake system out. I'm going to be replacing it with the GrimmSpeed unit, which has an integrated heat shield on it. Now, this should be pretty easy to pull. It's just MAF sensor here, and then loosening a couple clamps to get it off the turbo inlet. One part that I totally overlooked is the pitch stop mount, since it's hidden by the top mount intercooler, but now that's off, we can see it here. And I actually have a Torque Solutions unit in here, but since we're gonna be GrimmSpeedifying everything, and since I purchased this, we've come out with our own pitch stop mount, I'm gonna be replacing that. So it's just a couple of bolts and then it pulls right out. Now that the intercooler's off, we can take a little bit of a closer look of what's going on here. So pretty much you're gonna see a lot of wiring and hoses and all sorts of things. We're gonna start taking them off one by one, and I'm being careful to label everything because it's very obvious now, but after everything's apart, you tend to forget. So if you're ever gonna be doing a build like this, I would suggest labeling everything. In addition to that, I'm marking things here in red that are gonna be deleted since I'm gonna be reversing this manifold. Now that I've decided I'm doing a front mount, I'm gonna be shaving it down before I powder coat just to make it look a lot nicer. So again, it's good to mark things as you take them off, just so you know what to delete and what to keep. One recommendation I have is if you're taking your top mount intercooler off, you might as well pull off your throttle body as well. Now, not only is that going to give you the opportunity to replace the gasket that's underneath, which is cheap, so it's kind of a no-brainer, but more so, it's going to give you the ability to look inside the intake manifold and judge your engine's health based on that. Now, in this case, it's nice and clean in there, which is to be expected because this engine only has about 6,000 miles on it since the last rebuild, but most Subaru engines I've worked on have some degree of oil residue. If you got enough to where you're swiping your finger through and it builds up on there, that's a good opportunity to start thinking about putting in an AOS or an air oil separator. GrimmSpeed makes a unit that hooks on right to the filler neck, and then it's got a couple of hoses that connect to the crankcase and head breathers, and essentially captures that air oil mixture going through, and the baffling inside the unit sends the oil downwards into the filler neck, while the fresh air goes into your turbo inlet and basically beyond into your engine. Now, if you have a lot of oil residue, let's say you tip your intake manifold and it sort of pours out, that is an indication of a larger issue. And you could try a beefier AOS like the IAG unit, which the previous owner of this engine put on here. I think more as a precautionary measure since there's not really a lot of oil flowing through the intake tract on this one. But really, a lot of oil in the intake indicates that there's something going on. Typically, you have a lot of blow-by in the system. So eventually, you would want to start thinking about a rebuild because an AOS isn't a cure-all. It's essentially just something that prevents you from getting too much oil in the system, enough to affect the octane rating as you drive the car, causing some really major issues. And so just by taking that throttle body off, taking those extra couple of minutes, that gives you a really clear indication of what's going on inside the engine. So you can either plan for the future or you can be happy with what you see, like in this case, nice and clean. So far, I disconnected some more wires, hoses, sensors, those kind of things, being careful to label them like I mentioned so I know where they go back. I'm already starting to figure out an idea of how this is going to look once the manifold is out, reversed, when the AC's out and the alternator is relocated, and all the new piping is set up for the front mount. A lot of this hosing on the AOS is going to disappear since we're going to have the air intake right here with a big heat shield on it. I'm probably going to relocate the AOS somewhere above here since there's plenty of room, and it's going to cut the length of the hoses pretty much in half. So that's kind of the overall plan. The last thing I want to do tonight is take off the hood scoop since I'm not going to be needing that running a front mount. So seems like a good thing to finish up on. Here is our pile of parts so far. We've taken off the top mount intercooler, the intake, the strut bar, the pitch stop mount, blow-off valve, throttle body, alternator cover, the hood scoop, and then some miscellaneous brackets and such. Now, some of the stuff is going to go back on the car, some of it's going to get ditched as the build goes on, but this was sort of the first round of disassembly, the easy stuff to take off. Now we're left with a lot of hoses and sort of the front end of the motor that we're going to be tearing apart. So it's going to get a lot more fun. It's going to give me an idea as we move on of the finished product, so I'm getting really excited about that, obviously. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this first video where it's kind of the beginning of doing all of this stuff, and tune in for the next couple where it really starts getting ramped up towards the final build.